Hi, Christina Ward. Thanks for giving us so much time tonight.
Hello. I'm pleased to be speaking with you and the rest of the Coast audience.
Good. You have to explain something before I go any further. Knowing Feral House, I was surprised to see on your upcoming releases, or maybe it's out, but I don't think it is yet, the Happy Days cookbook. It just doesn't seem to fit.
Well, let me clarify a little bit. Feral House isn't publishing the Happy Days cookbook, but I wrote it.
Right. Okay, so you wrote it, but it's not coming out through Feral House.
No, it'll be coming out in spring. I live in Milwaukee. I'm from Milwaukee. And
right.
Aside from running Feral House, I was contacted. They wanted to do something for the 50th anniversary, Paramount did, of Happy Days, and I was happy to oblige.
Sure.
It was a fun project to work on.
I bet. I want to read the subtitle. Happy Days, the official cookbook from A to Zucchini Bread.
Yeah. Do you like that? I came up with that one.
It totally cracks me up, but especially with, the renaissance about Henry Winkler. I mean, he's got a new book out, and he's been on various podcasts I've listened to, and, he's been great. I mean, I've always been a fan, but it's so funny to hear him reflect back on Happy Days and how that stood in contrast with the person he knew he really was. And I think this is really well timed. I think it's great. And I really enjoyed, until the Jump the Shark episode. Do you have a shark recipe in the Happy Days cookbook?
Yeah, there is a shark recipe. Absolutely.
Gotta be. It's truly like one of the weirdest moments in TV history. It's like, well, that's done.
It's in reviewing all the episodes to kind of refamiliarize myself with the show. It was interesting to see how many kind of bizarre scenarios poor Fonzie and the gang got themselves into.
Well, and I remember it from its rollout in that quick little segment on Love American Style.
Yes.
Right. And so it was Love in the Happy Days or something like that. And it was, it was a bit of a rip on American Graffiti, but it was good. It was really fun. And we were all kids. We were talking about it at school the next day. And those of us who are into the 50s doo-wop revival and all of that. And so then we watched it become a show. And originally when it was filmed, and then it went in front of a live audience, and eventually it seemed like it was kind of running out of ideas, but really enjoyed the show for quite a while. So I'm happy to see that you're doing your part to honor the anniversary coming up of Happy Days.
It's my duty as a Milwaukeean.
Yeah. Milwaukee's a great city. People do not know, right? I mean, it's a terrific city.
It is. We're a great food city, too. And have you visited the Bronze Fonds?
I have not. I've been to Milwaukee a couple of times in the last few years, but no.
Yeah, there's a full-size statue of Henry Winkler as
funny.
Standing next to the Milwaukee River and with his thumbs up, and it's a bit of a thing to come and visit
sure.
and get your picture taken.
Yeah, kind of like the Mary Tyler Moore thing in downtown Minneapolis.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so other than the Packers, I love Milwaukee. So I just want to say that. And I've never had a bad meal in Milwaukee, for that matter. So I'm glad you made the point. And there's some really unique history to Wisconsin kind of in general that I think doesn't get enough attention. But I love the idea. So I'm a kind of a foodie. I cook a lot. But I had to sort of change some of my diet stuff, and now I'm becoming increasingly aware of certain things that I would have taken for granted to eat, and other things that I find, and I'm going to use this term lightly, but television commercials ritualize foods all the time. We're always maybe in a cultural religion sense. They're finding their own, body and bread, and wine. right?
There's a tendency, right? Humans have a tendency to sacralize the things we love.
Right.
And we ritualize them. And food especially, we need it. We are biologically made to release the little pleasure chemicals in our brains
Right.
when we're eating something delicious. Our body rewards us when we eat food. And so it reidifies the pleasure, and it reidifies why we're going to keep eating things. And it makes us want to honor it.
Yeah, and I'm using communion for a very specific idea in that it's community building, obviously, shares the same word, and that by having the same thing at the same time, that's part of it. It's not just that, you're going to have a certain type of, meal on a Tuesday and somebody else will have it on a Friday. You're sitting down and you're having it together. So I want to go back in time. What's our earliest known example of the kinds of things that we would put into the category of holy food?
Well, I think so. I'd want to go back even further than that. If we think about just eating food together, if we're not like our family unit, we're eating with our neighbors, and this, thousands and thousands of years ago, it's an act of trust. If someone gives us food, we trust that they're not going to poison us, either intentionally or accidentally. And so that's the initial act of trust that builds that community. And so within that, like you were saying, of celebrating a communion, a ritual, all at the same time is a very primitive instinct because it helps us recognize who is our community, who is our tribe, who's not in our tribe. And so these shared meals, these shared recipes, shared food, become something for a group of people. And then now going back even further, we think about the relationship between what we believe in a spiritual way, how it relates to food, is that pre-science days, people didn't quite understand where the food was coming from. It was coming from a plant, maybe an animal, but who put those things there? A deity did. Whether it is the one God that all the Abrahamic religions believe, or one of the many gods in Eastern traditions, we thank God for that food. And so when we think about even the references to manna from heaven,
we don't even know what manna is to this day.
We do, though. We do.
Tell me what you mean by that, because I've researched that, and there are opinions, but there's no one interpretation of manna. But if you have one, I'm open.
Okay, well, I'm going to rely on the best available science, and everyone knows science is theory until proven, and this is the best theory going based on the fact that none of us can time travel and go back to those early days, because science says it is essentially, it's an excretion from a bug, like a honey almost, and it is filled with water, and it evaporates. The water part evaporates overnight, and so it leaves a very sweet residue on tamarisk trees, and that can be collected, and it's white. And to this day, in like the Persian highlands, there's a candy, and forgive my pronunciation, called al-amanat. It's manna candy. They used to make food from it, and that is science's best theory as to what manna is.
That's close. That's pretty close to what I was taught, but even still, the volume is what surprised, the amount that would have had to be produced over a period of time made them question whether the word manna was being used for something else as well, as so often happens. But
and the ancient languages are always challenging that way because they, is anyone really speaking Aramaic? Not so much.
No. I studied Hebrew and Greek in seminary, and I not particularly good at Greek, but I was pretty good at Hebrew, and it was interesting because there is that of the Semitic languages, of the original sort of 7 Semitic languages. Aramaic gets tossed in there, but with our only evidence of that really is in how it's captured in these brief little snippets in the Holy Bible, both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. Let me though go back to that then, because I think this is another thing. It's not just what we do eat; it's what we don't eat that becomes sort of fascinating and seemingly random.
Right. And if we think back to, we're talking about the Levant area and these kind of, we'll call it biblical times, people are most familiar with the kashrut, the kosher food laws, as put down in the Babylonian Torah. Very soon, like around maybe, a couple hundred years before Christ, maybe a couple years after, and it's always hard to get these dates right. But it's this idea that food can be unclean and clean. But if we strip away some of the connotations of the religious and ritual part of it, we think about pork especially. Pork contains prebiotic, antibiotic days, a lot of pathogens. Pork cooked incorrectly to this day could make you quite ill. And so not eating pork was a really good way to stay healthy. Many of the food rules of that time would keep someone pretty safe from pathogens. And so if we think about the practical application, following those food rules makes for a fairly healthy lifestyle. And those food rules are a lot of times the basis of everything we're eating and not eating to this day.
Yeah, and some of it, I don't know whether you have a thought on this, but it also seems to me, and this was discussed in the movie Pulp Fiction, is that it's the animal itself that somehow was repugnant. They especially bottom feeders. So, the shrimps, lobsters. I remember I was at an Orthodox grocery store in St. Louis Park, just outside Minneapolis, and I was talking to a friend of mine, Wendy. Wendy, if you're listening, hi. And we were chatting, and suddenly the doors opened, and it might have been it was like the wedding dress sale at Filene's basement. Everybody came pouring in. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And she said, oh, the imitation crab is in. And so you got to rush and get the imitation crab, and so it was stuff like that. And I understand the difference between halal and haram, but I think that some of it is just because it's the lifestyle of the animal, not necessarily how well you had to cook it or not, because there are other ways that you have to do that with, some poultry. You have to do that with a lot of different things. But there is something about the lifestyle that made them suspect.
Absolutely. So we think about just associations. And people would put associations, as you said, to either animals or plants and imbue them with a ritual or spiritual quality. If we think back even to, Genesis, the temptation of an apple, which was probably really a quince. But that idea that food conveys a spiritual message or an anti-message, and things and characteristics that we wish to embrace or reject. And so, like you're saying, the scavengers don't eat insects. In many of these cultures, they become these rules, they become culture, and they get passed on without people always understanding where they came from and why they came about.
Yeah. But even then, once we get to the animal itself, in the case of cows, some are kosher cuts of beef and some aren't. And it's how the cow is killed as much as anything else. And it gets really complicated. And I think, well, that's human nature to somehow take something simple and just keep complicating it with every generation. But that is odd to me, too, at the same time.
I think we do have this idea of trying to make things unique and our own. And it goes with how we eat. And from that early stage, like you're talking about how slaughter essentially happens, both kosher and halal rules have very specific manners on how an animal must be killed. And a lot of it has to do with, does the animal suffer? And a lot of the people of the book Jewish religion, Christianity, Islam, is about reduction of suffering on an individual level and reduction of suffering for a community. And animals, if we read through those scripture, we read through those books, and we read through them not just spiritually, but as maybe historic a little bit, we see that there's these common threads about going easy on the planet and going gently and being kind. And that does apply to all living creatures.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm enjoying this quite a bit, so thank you again, Christina Ward, author of Holy Food. We'll get down to cases coming up in just a minute, but I'll follow that up by saying I've often wondered what it would have been like to sit down with Moses and offer him ceviche, which I happen to like. But, you know, there's even things that we know now about food science that people didn't know back then, or even on the lifestyle of an animal or whatever, that we think of, you know, pigs are dirty, but they're not really any, you know, they're not dirtier than any other animal. It's just we pen them up, you know.
It's what we project. It is what we project onto the animal, the plant, and, of course, our holy books. And they all converge to kind of inform what we're choosing to eat and not eat.
So this is true globally, and as we talked about the Abrahamic or the people of the book, the religions that we tend to associate most with laws, Christians walk away from a lot of that. We don't have a lot of food laws. We have some, and this is, you know, obviously part of the thrust of the book. We've got a lot of things that have impacted how we eat, but they're not necessarily laws, even though, you know, I mean, you can have a hot dog, it could be a kosher hot dog, but not a kosher hot dog. There's nobody that's really checking that sort of thing, and we don't have a system for that. And I don't know if I understand really why.
Oh, I've got a theory I can share with everybody.
Yeah, please do.
It comes down to the Protestant Reformation.
Oh.
As soon as people, and it's not just Martin Luther, it takes a few generations of that idea spreading that you don't need an intermediary to speak to God or have God talk to you. And once they take out the hierarchical idea of, in Roman Catholicism, where the priests were interpreting what the Bible said, what the word was, what the rules were. And once people were freed, essentially, from the middle management of their personal belief, then everything starts to go in various different directions. And, of course, one of the things that people, again, we talk about human nature, what they're going to reject are the rules that cause them not to eat foods they want to eat. So this idea of fasting as penance or ritualistic fasting days quickly goes out the window.
I've got a thought on bread and wine I'll get back to, but then I really want to start the chapters. We got time, and I love this about this show, that we can talk to somebody who's done a lot of really cool work and get a chance to do more than just, you know, touch the surface. Holy Food, Christina Ward, next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. I love the recipes in Holy Food, too. We're talking with Christina Ward, author of Holy Food, and understanding better about the things we eat and why we eat them, if I were going to sum it up a little shorter, but in particular when it comes to communes and religions and cults. And here's a question I'd be curious to see how you answer, and I don't, if it's in the book, I didn't see it. Why do you think, or what did your research say, or have you ever given much thought to why is it bread and wine for communion?
A lot of it goes back to, and I have done the research and thought about these things a lot, is these are both food items that you had mentioned earlier about just representational. Wine, blood, this idea, it's a very similar in the coloring, and so that is the like is like. Bread in the same way. We talk about bread as the staff of life. It is nutritious. It is something made, It is something pretty universal. Every culture has bread, a form of a bread. And if we actually go back and think about the area of the Levant during those time periods, the bread served was a flat bread, an unleavened bread. And again, that small round disc shows up in different types of cuisines as that idea that it's representational of the body of Christ. Now, this also goes into very early kind of animal, let's call them animistic type cultures, the idea of cannibalism.
Yeah.
This idea that we can eat our wisdom, that we can, if we, consume our relatives in some way after their death, that we then take on, and we can actually, essentially, by osmosis, by eating that, get their wisdom. And those ideas run through the idea of transubstantiation, of that how God can become manifest in our food and our drink.
Here's what I was taught in seminary, and it's you're the key word there. You said it was made, is that God can make wheat, God can make grapes, but God doesn't make wine and God doesn't make bread. It takes human interaction. And that's the symbolism of the two things. And some people have said, and I don't know this for a fact, but I talked to a friend who was a rabbi who once said, sort of the defining first act of this new sect, this new cult, this Christ cult, was the imagery of cannibalism, eating the body and the blood, drinking the blood. And that was so repugnant to what would have been like a rabbinic worldview, that was sort of a defiant thing to do or say or be. And that was a line of demarcation that just said right there, that was the break in that early upper room. I don't know that for a fact because, like you said, we don't have time machines, but I think that's a very intriguing idea. And it does speak to the whether we're talking about, this is hard. Like, how do you even begin to decide what's a cult versus a religion?
Well, there's actually a fairly good assessment tool. Again, not perfect, but good.
Right.
And it's called the BITE model. And it was developed by Steve Hassan, who is an ex-Moonie. And it's the idea of, does a group, and that could be anywhere from your bridge club to your spiritual group, does it do the following? Does it try to control your body, your physical sense? Does it try to control your information coming in? Does it try to control your thoughts, what you're thinking, what you're allowed to think? And does it try to control your emotions, what you feel about something, whether it's yourself or the group or anyone else? That's the BITE model. And so when we talk about food in this context, that is about controlling the body. So groups that have hit a lot of the marks, where they're controlling the body, they're controlling information, they're controlling thought, they're controlling emotion, that's a high control group. High control groups are classified as cults. So we can think about that model, and we can probably go anywhere from our bowling leagues and think that maybe a group will hit maybe one element on the model, but when they start hitting all of them, that's when you're in a cult. Yeah.
And that's when I know that you're a girl from Milwaukee when you say our bowling leagues. And I thought, I've never had them. All right. So, and the same thing, too, by the way, for like alcohol, for beer and other things. And that it became this bridge. And part of what often happens is then, like the priest doing the communion, or doing the whole service for that matter with his back to the congregation, is that there seems to be a lot of examples of controlling through food, and that control through food, maybe over time we don't even know why we do what we do, because it was so impactful to our ancestors, but it's not a story that gets passed down anymore. It's just something we do.
Yeah, and Americans have a really bad sense of history. We tend to forget
Yeah.
too much. And if we go back to even our grandparents' era, I've heard so many stories of people saying, oh, we serve this at Thanksgiving, as you were mentioning Thanksgiving.
Right.
And if you ask them why, and they don't know why. I know so many people that don't actually like green bean casserole, but they still make it every year because Granny made it. So these are these traditions that get passed along with food because they remind us a little bit of where we came from, who we are, who are our people. But we don't always understand that nuance of how it got that way and why are we doing something.
Yeah, like lutefisk.
Lutefisk. Why? And I can actually tell you why.
Well, because you needed it for crossing over the water, or what?
Well, it's an early form of food preservation to keep it from rotting, and so that high alkaline, it preserves it for a long time. And so every culture has some sort of food preservation tradition, and unless you're really a culinary experimenter, or you're raised in a specific culture, then where you're eating that from very early on, a lot of those kind of highly fermented foods, highly preserved foods, are kind of distasteful. It's one of those. Yeah, it's an acquired taste.
I can't do gefilte fish. I don't care what anybody says.
I can't either.
I can't. It's just, and I want to, and they look at me like, huh? It's like, no.
And that's one of the questions.
Why are we still eating this?
Right, and that's one of the questions I get asked a little bit with some of the recipes and doing this kind of research. Was there anything from ancient days I'd want to eat? And I'm like, no, not really. I'm an American. I can be really picky and choosy about what I want to eat because I'm only listening to my own body, telling me what it needs for nutrition and what I find delicious. And I think, and that's the very American thing. When all of these ideas about food, feasting and fasting and what can you eat, what can't you eat, when it comes to the United States, that's where we're this beautiful chaos machine, and it all starts going in multiple different directions.
Well, let's talk about some of those early directions. One of those things I love, of course, every year, and it's de rigueur at this point, but the pseudo explanation for why we have Thanksgiving and how what the meal looked like and whatever. It's obviously as we typically do, it's kind of a romanticized, hey, we're all friends here kind of a deal. And then, but it wasn't, right? I mean, it was, it's not that some things weren't on that table. But chances are, just like, it probably wasn't an apple in the Garden of Eden. It was some other fruit, but that we create these myths around our food, and then we maintain them even though we don't know why.
Right. Now, think about Thanksgiving in that way. Now, Thanksgiving, if you remember the great line of Bill Murray from Stripes, Americans, we've been kicked out of every country on the planet. So all these people are coming to the North American continent. The people that were coming, sent over by England and Holland and Germany, they were religious extremists and separatists, Protestants. They were the ones that were even offensive to people who were Protestant.
Totally.
These were just the most outrageous beliefs. They come to the United States. I'm thinking specifically about the Plymouth colony, the Puritans, as we understand.
Right.
And they're fundamentalists. When the harvests go bad, when they're having struggles feeding themselves, they understand that they have sinned against God. Something has offended God, and they must fast. And they do. And there wasn't a regular fasting schedule for the Puritans based on their belief system, but they did. The leaders would often kind of call for a fast as an atonement to, tell God, we're so sorry. Whatever we did to offend you, we're sorry. Look at how sorry we are. We're going to give up all our delicious food to show you how sorry we are. Just bring back our food. Right. And when the food does come back, when they figure it out a little bit, how to grow things and how to hunt, then how do you celebrate God's great gift to you? You have a feast. And that's where that feast comes from, that Thanksgiving feast, which is supposed to be now an annual celebration to remind us as Americans that there was a time where we were hungry and we needed help, and that we feast and we share that with our neighbors because we are grateful for the bounty.
And that the belief that we were all once sojourners. We were all once immigrants. And we lose that. We lose that. And that component doesn't really exist anymore in the sense of, it's like, it's a very, what we would say, a very vertical sense of gratitude. Not, right?
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I'm so excited about this because what you're seeing today, modern America, if you go to Thanksgiving at my old in-laws, my sister's ex-husband's family who were from Guadalajara, they loved Thanksgiving. And Mama Rosa made the best turkey ever, but she also made tamales. And that's a tradition you see in so many immigrant families. They love Thanksgiving. They understand that it is about being an American. And we become Americans through our stomach by eating these kind of traditional meals together, whether we're in a large, millions and millions of people together on the same day eating a Thanksgiving dinner based on foods, tradition, and foods that we bring to our country, as well as then just our smaller groups that we share. And I'm from Milwaukee, fish fry on a Friday night. These are all religiously informed foods and food traditions that then get shared out between the larger community. And we form a new community and a new bond by sharing these meals together.
What don't we know about food that you... I mean, I know this answer just because I've been reading a little bit in the book, but what do you feel like is a story that we really need to be more aware of, and an impact of a cult or a commune on something which we eat regularly and understand differently?
One of my favorites, there's a few favorites, and these are more of the fun facts elements in the research in the book, which is I was talking about fish fry. Fish fry, McDonald's Filet-O-Fish is rooted in the Catholic fish fry tradition. It was a McDonald's franchise owner in Buffalo, which is a big fish fry Catholic city from the early on 1900s, and he knew that people weren't going to buy hamburgers on Fridays, especially Fridays during Lent, when many Catholics still do not eat meat. And so he noticed the churches who were sponsoring fish fries. And he thought and had that idea, if I could serve a fish sandwich, I would retain those customers. And he did. It was wildly successful and adopted by McDonald's corporate office and spread throughout the country and on the menus every single day. And many people will order the Filet-O-Fish sandwich from McDonald's and not understand, not even know that it's part of the Catholic no meat on Friday traditions.
And kind of an act of corporate rebellion, because McDonald's originally did not want him to do it. He was straying from the franchise model. He was introducing a
hamburger schism.
Yeah, it was. And especially on religious basis. And I think it was because he had also seen the bottom line. It was like, great, Monday through Thursday, and then Friday was boop.
Right.
So they eventually caught on. But it's such a weird little sandwich. Anyway, it's not like you want to go to a fish fry, go to Milwaukee. I mean, that's a fish fry.
There's a difference for sure, but it's a good example of how our religious beliefs can affect the food and influence the food. But the beautiful thing is when it comes to the United States, like I said, it kind of goes in so many different directions for a couple reasons. Our First Amendment, that establishment clause, meaning that we don't have a state religion.
Right.
So we don't have that government saying, if you want to believe and be a Pastafarian, and wear a strainer on your head, you can do that. Nobody can tell you no. The government can't say no. And so the First Amendment, and then modern for 20th century, are tax laws that gave this nonprofit tax-free status for religious organizations, really kick-started some of the food traditions and food businesses, which are one of the things that might surprise people where that religious influence comes in, something like Little Debbie's. Little Debbie snack cakes originated with the Seventh-day Adventists.
I did not know that. I didn't read that. So tell me about that. How was it that Little Debbie? She's got that little hat on. It was kind of a, I don't know if I could say this, but it was sort of at least in my neighborhood, it was kind of a poor person's hostess. It was right?
It was definitely low rent. But how they started in the 30s as a company, is the Seventh-day Adventist diet is highly restrictive and nearly vegan, vegetarian. Most, there's always a little asterisk, but Seventh-day Adventists, if they're following kind of the religious advice, they are not eating meat at all. They're also, and this goes to what you were saying earlier about food and sex, they're not eating any kind of stimulant at all. And what they interpret as a stimulant is caffeine, coffee, sugar, spices, and chocolate is considered a stimulant. And so they were creating foods and recipes that could help new converts follow the restrictive diet, as well as be an attractant. And it's much easier to follow a restrictive diet if you can go to the grocery store and buy it pre-made. And Little Debbie snack cakes were made according to Adventist dietary rules. And that's how that started. If you were a kid eating Little Debbie's in the 60s and 70s, you probably remember how terrible they actually taste.
Blah. Yeah.
Right. Because they were using carob, not chocolate.
Right. Oh, that's funny.
It was, a very poor substitute, but also one with religious connotations, because carob is also known as St. John's bread. It was the food theoretically that God gave to John the Baptist in the desert when he was wandering for 40 days. So the idea is that these plants have these religious connotations also makes it really attractive to, especially new religious movements, to incorporate that in their foodways. Everyone can rest assured that if they're buying Little Debbie's today, the SDA did sell the company in the 80s. It wasn't the SDA owned, but that affiliate, and they use chocolate now. So now you're safe. Okay. You will not have to go through the terror of the 70s childhood of eating carob unaware.
It was awful. It was like Buddig meats.
It's like dirt. It's just not a great taste. And again, we're going to offend all the carob lovers out there, but I'm willing to risk that.
I am too. Call me if you need reinforcements. My godmother was Jewish, and so I went to a lot of the high holy days as a kid, and she would bring me back the candy that was very popular in Israel when she would go there. It was awful. It's like, this isn't candy. And she would be really proud of it. She goes, I brought this all the way back. Blech. And my mother would always kick me under the table to be polite about it. But man, it was awful. All right. So we're just getting started. This is so fascinating. Let's talk more about the cults and the communes and the impact on the foods that we eat that are they're, if it's not quite hidden history, nobody's celebrating it. And we'll talk more about that with Christina Ward next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett.